Hey everybody, happy Friday. John Lorden here. Welcome to another episode of BrainScratch for today, September 29th, 2017. Hope you all had a nice week. Some pretty interesting developments have happened, possibly related to the Delphi murders case. Let's go ahead and just share the screen and take a look at it together. Now, I can't tell you guys how much I stare at this composite picture and I wonder when the day will come that I can see what this guy actually looks like in a real photograph. Is today possibly that day? It might be, but we've got a lot of information and details to get through before we weigh that. So, and as usual, we're going to start this story at the beginning. And that means we're going to talk about a man named Tim Watkins, who has recently been shot and killed. This is from csindy.com. Tim Watkins was shot to death in an area known for illegal activity. Despite the fact that the U.S. Forest Service banned shooting there in 2014, State Senator Michael Merrifield says gunshots are a constant at Mount Herman, which is near Monument and Palmer Lake. Once, he saw a man and his son shooting right next to a no-shooting sign. He reminded them of the ban, but he says the father told him to mind your own effing business. Unarmed and alone, Merrifield simply moved on. Other times, drivers have tried to run him off the road, and once he heard and felt a bullet go over his head. It was, Merrifield says, in about the same area where the body of his friend was recently found. Tim Watkins, 60 years old, disappeared while riding his mountain bike in the Mount Herman area on Thursday, September 14th. 2 days later, his shoe and bicycle were found. A day later, his body was found. He had been shot. Merrifield says he wonders if someone shot Watkins after he simply reminded them of the shooting ban. There's just something about Mount Herman, he says. The area seems to attract a, quote, low-class, angry group of users that can create scary situations. Watkins moved around the state, but his hometown was Palmer Lake, and he had a passion for Mount Herman. Watkins worked on or constructed some 60 to 70% of the trails there. You could tell this is obviously a man that really loved the area and had his extreme passion for biking in that area, despite the fact that there was gunshots going off all over the place, potentially people doing drugs, other illegal activities in that area. Back in June of 2011, the author is speaking here, I wrote about two friends who were mountain biking Mount Herman. Bullets began to fly around them, and they crouched down, yelling for the unseen shooters to stop. The shooting continued, and since they were both armed too, they took out their guns, ready to defend themselves. They never saw the shooters and eventually crept back to their car and reported the incident. Recently, there have been multiple reports that someone has been chasing cyclists with an axe in the area. The sheriff's office reported that a man whose vehicle matched the description given by witnesses in the axe incidents was arrested on September 25th. Daniel Nations, 31, was booked into Teller County Jail on an unrelated weapons charge. The office won't say if they believe he is connected to Watkins' killing. And just because I want to give her some credit, the author of this really well-written piece is J. Adrian Stanley. So what does this have to do with the Delphi murders? As we move forward, you will see that there might be some connectivity there, but I wanted to pay some time just to talk about this particular case. And that's why I wanted to feature this story on today's episode. We're talking about an area that is already known specifically for illegal activity, an area that is known for guns being shot a bit recklessly in this area, if it's people doing target practice or hunting, all kinds of stuff that's going on out there. So before we even get into the rest of today's story, this man that we're talking about, Daniel Nations, he's innocent until proven guilty. Now, there's a lot of compelling information we're going to look over here. We're going to learn a bit about his past and see if he might be the type of person capable of this stuff. But in this particular case, I just want to remind us that we have to start from that perspective. Daniel is indeed innocent until he's been proven guilty. We've acknowledged that this area is known for shootings. It could be that Tim was shot possibly on purpose by someone else other than Daniel, possibly by Daniel. It could be that Tim was shot on accident. I do think that there is a possibility of that. What I'm curious about that makes me think maybe it's not really an accident is how his mountain bike and a shoe were found in one spot, but it took them another day before they found his body. Why weren't all those items together if this was truly an accident? Did it start as an accident and then someone tried to cover it up and potentially moved his body? Still a possibility. So please keep all that in mind as we roll forward on covering this story. Jumping over to an article at denverpost.com, Daniel Nations was found with a .22 caliber rifle and a hatchet, but denied using the weapons to threaten people. Now, it is probably worth noting a .22 caliber rifle. If you're going to an area where there is recreational shooting going on, I believe that's going to be a somewhat common model, also for some types of hunting. But we'll see how this ties into Tim's case. Suspicions are quickly mounting that Daniel Nations, who has been officially charged with a single count of illegally possessing a firearm after he was arrested following hatchet threats on Mount Herman Road, could be connected to 3 murder cases across 2 states. After Nations was named a suspect in the Mount Herman Road hatchet threats, based largely on the vehicle he was driving, Gazette news partner KKTV reported that a gun taken from Nations' car matched the caliber used to kill cyclist Tim Watkins, who was found dead in the same area. Quote, none of that has been confirmed, El Paso County Sheriff's Office spokeswoman Jacqueline Kirby said, and Nations hasn't been charged related to menacing or the homicide investigation. Still, if this fact is true that Tim was actually killed with a .22, we have the first piece in maybe a lot of pieces of this puzzle that could mean that this is the man that we're looking at that did it. Let's get some more details about Daniel's arrest over at krdo.com. It looks like this is an ABC local news television affiliate. News Channel 13 obtained affidavits for Daniel Nations. Woodland Park PD spotted a vehicle at Woodland Park Pawn and Loan along Highway 24 on Monday afternoon that fit the description of one involved in a menacing incident just days before. Officers parked at a nearby Arby's and waited until they saw a man and a woman get into the sedan. They followed them east on Highway 24 and pulled them over at People's Bank off Scott Avenue. One officer questioned Caitlin Nations in the driver's seat, while the other talked to Daniel Nations in the passenger seat. There were also 2 children in the back seat, according to Woodland Park Police. Caitlin was told that she had been pulled over because of a missing taillight. She claimed that she had hit a tree earlier in the day. The other officer questioned Daniel about the incident on Mount Herman Road. Daniel admitted that they had a hatchet in the vehicle, but they never threatened anyone with it. In the affidavit, he tells police, "We're not that kind of people." Daniel went on to say that someone had run them off the road and he shook his fist out of the window. When asked if they had any other weapons on them, Daniel said his wife had a .22 caliber rifle in the trunk. Caitlin said she had purchased it as a protection after their vehicle was broken into. I don't know if I buy that story. Sounds kind of weird to me. Someone's been breaking into my car, so I'm going to get a .22 caliber rifle and keep it in the trunk of that car. To be quite honest, I don't know if they are living out of this car or not. I'm kind of getting the feeling they might be, but I haven't found any firm details on that. But let's continue. After running Caitlin and Daniels in the system, they both came up as having non-extraditable FTA, that's failure to appear, warrants from other states, and Daniel was a registered sex offender. In addition, the license plate on the sedan was registered as expired as well. So a lot of challenges going on for this couple. And according to this, they are holding Daniel, particularly because he has a weapon and he's a previous offender, and previous offenders aren't supposed to have weapons. So now we know at least how they were captured. Well, most of the facts. There's one little factoid I'm going to save until the end of the video because it might be a very strange echoing of poetic justice, but we'll get to that after we review everything. Heading over to chicago.cbslocal.com. Colorado arrest maybe break in Delphi, Indiana murders. Nations is being held in the Teller County Jail. He's been charged with possession of a weapon by a previous offender. Other charges are pending, reports CBS Denver. So it's the first time we hear that. But of course, if they do think that he was threatening people with a hatchet, I'm sure there's some more charges that are going to come from that. The CBS station reports authorities are now considering Nation's possible connection to the bicyclist's death, as well as to the murders of Abigail J. Abby Williams, 13, and 14-year-old Liberty Rose Lynn Libby German. The teen girls were killed in February while hiking in Delphi, Indiana, a community of about 3,000 people. I've done a few different videos on this. I will have them in the links below so you can go back and hear more about that case. It is a case, there's always one case, it seems like, for every year that I do this show that really kind of haunts me and sticks with me, and I, in particular, want to see solved. For 2017, this is the case. These two young women deserve justice, and are we possibly looking at the face that matches that composite sketch? I'm not certain at this time. It's kind of tough, but there's a lot of people looking in that direction, including the authorities. Let's move on here. This website, unfortunately, only comes up on the left side of my screen, so I need to, there we go, make it so you guys can see it a little easier and clean up my screen here for you. This is from the sexual offender website for the state of Florida. And here we can see another mugshot of Daniel James Nations. This photo was taken August 29th of 2012. And we get just kind of his basic information here. We get a former address. We can see that at some point he did live in Indiana. We're going to get into that more as well. Brown hair, brown eyes. For his height, they have 5'10", and for his weight, they have 190 pounds. Just keep that in mind as we go through more information on these cases here. Heading over to wishtv.com, investigators in Delphi double homicide made aware of Colorado arrestee. Indiana State Police Sergeant Kim Riley said they were given the information on Nations on Wednesday, but have made no connection between Nations and the deaths of two Delphi teenagers. It's still early on, he said. And keep in mind, we don't have a lot of detail in terms of what happened to these young women. We don't really have solid information in terms of what type of evidence was collected at the scene. I hope there is a DNA profile. If there is a DNA profile from the scene, this should be very easy for them to test, and we should hear something very, very quickly about this. Of course, that's pending them having to investigate enough to make sure that their case is solid before they officially break that publicly. So we might still be in a little bit of a waiting period, even if this is the guy. And then, of course, if they don't have DNA from the scene of the double homicide, it's going to make it a bit tougher. They're going to have to find a lot more evidence. And that, of course, is probably going to be, it's going to lengthen the amount of time that it's going to be before we hear about it publicly. But they did release a comment here. This is from the investigators in Indiana. We are aware of the arrest of the person in Colorado and are investigating to see if he could be a suspect in the Delphi double murder investigation. Please keep in mind the Indiana State Police has received more than 1,000 photos of persons alleged to be similar in appearance to the composite sketch of the Delphi person of interest. Each and every one of these tips are investigated for any potential connection to our case. We will give the same attention to the person arrested in Colorado, but right now, there is nothing that definitively connects this person to our investigation. If that should change with this tip or any other tip, rest assured we would be sharing such news with all media sources. And it's tough because just from what we've looked at currently, even if we do find out that Daniel did kill Tim, that type of murder, is a bit different. That's a 60-year-old man. We're not talking about two teenage girls that were seemingly stalked. I mean, from the information we do know about the Delphi murders, they were at least followed for a period of time, long enough for them to get pictures and recordings of this guy. So the MO here is a little bit different if we're just looking at these two particular crimes from what we know about them. And how do you connect him necessarily back there? Well, we know that he lived in Indiana. We're going to get some more detail about that. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot. There's really nothing that I found that particularly ties him to Delphi in particular. But when you look at that photo of him and you look at the composite sketch, is it possible? I don't know. So I wanted to put together a little montage for you. Here are all the photos of Daniel Nations that I could find next to the composite sketch for a couple of seconds each, so you can get a good look at it. It does occur to me that the composite sketch, one of the things that really draws my attention about it is the detail around the nose. They seem to have done a lot of detail work around the nose. And in a few of the photos of Daniel in particular, it seems like a pretty strong match. Now, there are certainly differences. One of the things that grabbed me immediately is the space between Daniel's eyes. His eyes seem to be a little wide or going out further on his head than I think the composite does. But in this picture in particular, even that seems to be not terribly far off. You've got the same kind of chin and goatee going on. The mouth seems to be a pretty close match. The ears don't really seem to be a solid match, but that could just be details that were missed. And also keep in mind, we're not even really sure where this composite has come from publicly. The details have been tied on that as well. Let's continue. And we're moving now to an article at Heavy. I've been really appreciating their research work. I've mentioned this in a couple of videos. Tom Cleary put this article together. Basically, they seem to do what I do for BrainScratch. They review a lot of different news sources. They pull it all together into one place where it's really concise and it's a good dose of information. So this is their usual 5 Fast Facts series. The Indiana State Police said Thursday that Nations is a person of interest in the Delphi killings, WTTV TV reports. So seems to me, at least from Indiana's side, that, and this kind of lines up with the comment that we just read, they are looking into this. They are giving it its due diligence. And I think anyone that they're looking at in terms of photos that have been submitted, they could fairly call that a person of interest. That's not the same as being a suspect. You become a suspect when they're starting to have information that is forming the opinion for them that you have a higher likelihood of being involved in the crime. Being a person of interest, that's a type of term that gets thrown around quite a bit. A lot of people could be POIs. But let's continue here. There's a lot of this information that we've already covered. So, but if you are only going to read one article on this outside of watching this video, I recommend the Heavy article. The sheriff's office says there are many similarities to the Delphi killings, but would not elaborate. And that's kind of speaking to the point that I was just talking about. I'm not sure where those similarities are. Of course, we know he has his sex offender history. That is for an indecent exposure charge from what I can see, but we don't really know the details of that. Are they assuming that he is connected to Tim's murder? If that's the case, are they seeing similarities between the Delphi killings and Tim's murder? Was a .22 used? I'd be really, really surprised, because in the photo that we see of the man walking on the bridge, he doesn't appear to have a rifle on him. I would hate to think this, but is it potentially the hatchet? Is the hatchet somehow involved with the Delphi killings and we just haven't been told about that yet? Man, I would feel terrible to hear that information, particularly for the family of these young girls. But I don't know. I can only speculate based off this comment that the sheriff's office is saying there's similarities, but they're not going into any detail about what those similarities are. Down to point number 4. Nations convicted of indecent exposure in South Carolina is listed as a non-compliant sex offender in Indiana. Daniel Nations has been a registered sex offender since 2007 after he was convicted. Nations is also registered as a sex offender in Florida in 2012 after moving there. He was also convicted of public indecency in 2016 in Indiana for, and I'm going to edit this a little bit, for fondling another person in a public place. His last known address was listed as being in Martinsville, Indiana. Martinsville is about 100 miles south of Delphi. He also lived in Greenwood, which is about the same distance away from Delphi. The only thing that's kind of ringing a bell for me on that is when you look at the community of Delphi, you're talking about a small community, only about 3,000 people. One of the things that I was thinking early on when I started looking into that case was this had to be someone that either drove through regularly, that kind of had a reason to be there regularly and got to know the place, got to know that trail, or at least that it existed in particular. Knowing that Mr. Nations here lived 100 miles in one direction and then 100 miles in another from Delphi, it certainly gives him a chance to have that knowledge. It still doesn't quite put him in that town. It'd be something else if we heard, he had a job that made him work in Delphi, or that he had to drive through Delphi to get to, or something along those lines. But we don't have that level of information out. The Indiana Sex Offender Registry shows that Nations is, quote, non-compliant because he has not reported his whereabouts to police. He's also been convicted of domestic abuse in Indiana. So this guy's rap sheet is starting to get long, and believe me, we're not even at the end of it. And here they have a picture of him with a child they've blurred out. It might be his own child. We're going to see here. Nations is originally from Chesney, South Carolina, and is the father of a young daughter. Quote, I hope at my heavenly appointment, God will judge me by my heart and not my actions, he had posted once on Facebook. That comment seems to lead me to believe he has done some bad actions in his life. Does that mean as bad as the things that he's being looked into at this point? I don't know. But that's definitely a man that has a past that he's not completely happy with. Along with the domestic violence and public indecency convictions in Indiana, Nations has several other arrests in that state, court records show. He has a pending case for driving with a suspended license and possession of drug paraphernalia that was filed in 2017 in Greenwood City Court. He also has a pending case from 2016. He's facing charges of possession of marijuana, possession of paraphernalia, and knowingly or intentionally operating a motor vehicle without ever receiving a license in that case. Those charges, I think there are many people that have those charges that never reach the degree of committing crimes like we're talking about here. So I don't know that these necessarily give him, if we were doing like a profile makeup on him, I don't know that these charges really put him in the category of, 3-time murderer or even 1-time murderer if we're just looking at him being connected to the Tim Watkins case. But he has been convicted of invasion of privacy, possession of marijuana, failure to pay child support, driving with a suspended license, and operating a motor vehicle without financial responsibility, obviously without insurance. So we now know that Daniel has a wife. What does she think about everything that's going on? Heading over to Gazette.com. Daniel Nations' history is hard to track. Family said they haven't seen him in years. His criminal background spans more than a decade and crosses multiple states, and law enforcement has released few details. Caitlin Nations, who identified herself as Nations' wife, called this arrest upsetting. Quote, this whole situation is a shock to me, and I am so embarrassed. Nations' grandmother, Frona Ham, 87, said she's the last real family he has outside of his wife and their 3 children. Yes, they have 3 children. For some reason, I'm wondering why only 2 were in the back of the car. But his mother died and his father is in prison, she said, from South Carolina. Ham said she raised Nations since he was 6, but she hasn't seen or talked to him in at least 5 years after she asked him and his wife to move off of her property. They were gone the next morning, she said. Quote, "I don't know anything about him," Ham said. "He hasn't called me or nothing. I can't get him out of trouble, and even if I could, I wouldn't because he knows better," she said. Sounds like a bit of a tough upbringing, of course. That shouldn't excuse the types of crimes that we're looking at, or quite honestly, even him threatening people with a hatchet, if that is indeed true as well. Jumping over to kktv.com. Here's the tidbit that I wanted to hold off on telling you guys. How was he really found for this hatchet threatening charge? A photo of a red car taken on Mount Herman Road turned out to be a crucial piece of the puzzle for investigators. The picture was taken by a friend searching for Tim Watkins, who went missing in that area on September 14th and was found dead a few days later. The friend said he thought it was strange that the car, sporting Indiana plates, drove by the search group more than once. Investigators say they wouldn't have found the vehicle so soon if it wasn't for the witness taking that photo. And as you can see in this kind of close-up version of the photo here, he's actually sitting in the car when this photo is taken. Now, what I'm curious about here is if it's true that he was threatening people around this area, what was really his motivation for doing that? If he did indeed kill Tim Watkins and Tim Watkins hadn't been found yet, was he doing this to potentially scare people away from the area, to slow down the search, and to possibly make it so that Tim was not found or discovered? The weird piece of possibly poetic justice here is if he turns out to be the Delphi murderer as well, those girls caught photos of him at that point as well. It would really blow my mind to find out that this guy was captured by photos of two people in two separate incidents, and that it was indeed the same person. I mean, you want to talk about fate's hand intervening in this case. If that turns out to be the case, sign me up for believing in that. We don't know that that's the fact now, but at a minimum, photos taken by these people directly helped them identify this vehicle. One of the photos even has the license plate in it, so like the cops had the full number and everything. So I don't know. Could be something very interesting if he does turn out to be the same guy. I hope at the bottom of my heart that he is that same person for those families. Those families really deserve an answer, and it's already been too long. As a matter of fact, let's jump to a comment from one of the family members here. This is over at denver.cbslocal.com.
It's so hard emotionally if you allow yourself to get so wrapped up in it that even though, I'm sitting here with my fingers crossed, hoping, that this is the person.
People in the area helped build this sketch of a possible suspect who bears a striking resemblance to El Paso County suspect Daniel Nations.
My very first reaction at just a quick glance was, well, I think the eyes are a little wide. But once I was given the pictures side by side with the sketch, there's a lot of similarities.
So even the family, of course, is hoping this pans out, but you can hear they're trying to be reserved. But it's hard when you have something like this and you want something this bad. Moving over to abcnews.go.com. Abby Williams' mother, Anna Williams, said the arrest has given her a glimmer of hope. Quote, "Our family is hoping and praying that God's got this and that today is finally the day." And I know there's a bunch of you out there that are probably hoping and praying the same for them as well, just like I am here. So look, guys, this case in particular, Daniel Nations' case, is really cracking quickly here. So I'm recording this on Thursday. I'm releasing it on Friday. There is likely to be new developments that I don't get in this video. Just a few minutes ago, I went and I searched for any new news information on this. And it's kind of, I did find some articles. We're going to touch on them real quick, but it really points to the state that we're in today of looking at this case. So let me show you guys what I mean. First of all, starting with an article at the Decatur Daily Democrat, it's saying that police link Colorado crime to Delphi murders. That title seems to sound like they found a link, but if you read through it, there's no real information about any particular link being found. It's really just giving a very short version of what we've already talked about on today's video. And there's even a commenter at the bottom. So is there a link to the Delphi murders? I couldn't find one in the article, yet that's the title, says Carrie. And Carrie makes a very good point. To juxtapose that, we have at the pharaohstribune.com, man arrested in Colorado, not person of interest in Delphi case. And if you read through this article, you're going to see the same information we've already covered, the same exact quotes. Sergeant Kim Riley on Thursday morning addressed Nation's arrest, stating that authorities are leaving no stone unturned in the investigation. He also stated that at this time, Nations is not necessarily a person of interest in the investigation. But then they go into the quotes of the stuff that I've already read to you, including the specific quote, right now there is nothing that definitively connects this person to our investigation. That doesn't mean that this is necessarily not a person of interest. So once again, the last article had a very bad title, couldn't support it. This article has a conclusion at the top that once you dive into the details, doesn't quite support it. And let's throw it another direction over to CBS4Indy.com. Indiana State Police say man arrested in Colorado is person of interest in Delphi murders. Let me tell you, these last three articles all released within about the same hour. That's how nuts the news is going on this thing right now. Indiana State Police said Thursday a man arrested in Colorado is now considered a person of interest in the murders of two Delphi teenagers. That's the exact opposite of what I told you 2 articles ago. On Thursday, ISP called Nations a person of interest in the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German, but did not elaborate further. And once again, they don't provide the quote where they are actually saying this is a person of interest. Once again, I think it's just coming down to understanding what that term really means. You've got one person writing an article that thinks that person of interest means suspect. It doesn't. You've got another person writing a different article that thinks person of interest means that it's someone they're going to look into. I personally believe that that is much more accurate. And then you've got a third article saying, please link the Colorado crime to the Delphi murders. And of course, that has not happened yet. I can't find anything to come even close to saying that that has happened. So that's the state of where it is right now. But if you take a look in the news this morning, over the weekend, you are likely to see some developments. I'm pretty sure some developments are going to shake out. If major developments do come out over the weekend, we will do the same thing that we did for the Kanika Jenkins case, where I will do an update on Johnny Vlogs on Monday, specifically about the news updates related to this case. We'll do another one of those, BrainScratch takes over Johnny Vlogs things, because things seem to be moving really fast. I hope we hear that this is the guy. It would be great to have that case solved. But if he's not, I hope that he also gets clear of that, and we hear that he's clear of that very soon, so people can go back to focusing on that composite and keep looking for that man, keep sending those suggestions in, and hopefully he'll be found. Speaking of which, if you have information on the Abby and Libby case, I will have the contact details in the description box below where you can send that information forward. I know that there has been some people in the Indiana State Police have been commenting that they've been flooded with a bunch of bad information from people looking around on Facebook. I've already spoken about that in a video. Please don't do that. We're looking for people where the picture makes some logical sense for you to submit that information. For example, you heard someone say something at some point where it made you think they could be connected to this, and they happen to look like that picture. Send that stuff forward. But I went bumping around on Facebook and I found a guy that looks like him. Here, go look into this case. That's not really what police are looking to do here. That composite sketch looks like a lot of people out there. We're looking for the right person, which is much different. Before I let you go, I did want to point you to one more potentially good resource here. Gray Hughes has become a little bit of a pal of mine discussing this case outside of the channel, but he has done some work using Google Earth, and he is a bit of a 3D modeling person. He has done some crime scene flows where you can track where they actually walked. He's using graphics integrated with real video footage. It's a very unique look at this, and if you want a real ground level look at that area, what it looks like, the path that they potentially took to the final crime scene, this video in particular, Crime Flow version 3, is, in my opinion, it's the best resource to get that level of understanding. One other point before I let you go, just another point of consideration here. The height that is listed for Daniel is 5'10". The weight is listed at 190 pounds. That fits squarely in the size that police were looking for in terms of the Delphi suspect. And my friend Gray also did some analysis with his video models and was able to estimate that somewhere around 5'8", 5'9" is probably the right height for the person that is standing on the bridge. And the way he's standing, he's got his head cocked forward. So I think it's possible that he could eke another inch out if he was to straighten up a little bit there. Could this be the guy? Could Daniel James Nations be the one? Could be. The question is he? And hopefully we'll find that out sooner rather than later. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here on today's Brain Scratch. I appreciate each and every one of you out there. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you back here on the Lord and Arch channel on Monday.